my youngest son was missing.
Sorry.
My son was missing. Oh no, that's okay. All of a sudden that was loud. But yeah, my son was not attending school voluntarily. He had massive school refusal. He was not having upsets at school, but he was having incredible, eruptive, very violent meltdowns at home. Well, there is no help at school when the meltdowns are at home. So there's no aid offered or any assistance. And the vice principal was so fabulous, but she took me by the shoulders and she said, honey, you need to take your boy home today. You need to keep your boy at home. And it's not going to be, wrong or bad for him at all. She says, I actually encourage this. He will graduate grade 12 if he never sees another public school day in his life. She was fantastic. Not all of them are like that, but we had such a great experience. And then my oldest son was partway through grade 7 in junior high, and he came home just before Christmas and said, I'm not going back. And it took him 3 weeks to actually be able to process it and talk about it. He just felt really trapped there. So yeah, our homeschool process started there, and I was on the fence. I was that mom that was like threatening to send them back to school if they didn't do their work. And that's terrible, but I did it. So if any of you have done that, we're all in the same boat here. And it was so good, because finally I woke up one day and I said, I am not going to waver on this. We are going to decide that this is what we're doing, whether it's popular, whether it looks like anybody else would do this, we are going to do this. And yes, my kids did not like workbooks. They didn't do any of the paper stuff. They loved gaming. They loved being online. They just thrived doing hands-on stuff, and we ran with it. And they have become lovers of learning in their own way that looks different than maybe anybody else, but it's thrilling to see.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Cynthia. Golda, do you want to introduce yourself next and how you came to homeschooling, unschooling?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Golda David, and I came to unschooling I feel like it's a rocky road. I feel like I'm still on it, actually. There's still times when I struggle with some of the ideas, because I was a teacher for 14 years, and then I was a principal of 2 different schools. And so when I started homeschooling, I was the principal of the school that I took my son out of. And the reason I took him out is because he had post-traumatic stress disorder and he couldn't cope with school anymore. So that's where we started. We started in the middle of December, like in December, I pulled him out, which was not super popular, if you can imagine that, in the education system. But they did understand that my son was getting quite ill and couldn't cope. So I pulled him out of school and I started homeschooling him. And we started off with absolutely just like following the provincial curriculum. I brought home worksheets from the school that I was the principal of, from that teacher. And he had developed such a resistance by then. So this is apart from his PTSD. He had developed a resistance to learning at all in any form, in any schooly type way. So it was constantly kind of a fight with him. He didn't like to do worksheets. He did them. He was compliant, but I didn't feel like he was learning anything from them after a time. I also found out, like, I had listened to webinars and podcasts a little bit about it because I was interested in it during my master's degree. I became interested in these alternative forms of education. And I'd heard that you could do like an hour and a half a day and do a full day of school. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, whatever. Wink, wink, right? No, that's true. That is absolutely true. I didn't realize that until I started doing it, that was true. So I'd bring him home all the work and he'd do it in an hour and a half at night while I was making dinner. And then it was almost, I don't know, I think over time I started to wonder about the value of worksheets and learning in that formal way. And I'm not necessarily against worksheets, but I don't think it necessarily works most of the time. It just looks like what we think learning looks like, but that's not really necessarily what's happening. So that's where I started off as a as a principal who'd done her education degree in administration, but developed a really strong interest in alternative education and an interest in homeschooling. Particularly, I'd already read John Taylor Gatto. I had a really strong, like after I read Gatto's book in one weekend, I actually had this really strong inner struggle about what I was doing in the school system itself. Like I was a high school teacher at the time, and I read that book and it just shook me right to the core as an educator, thinking, what are we doing? Like all of the things that we do at school are harming kids, and am I part of that? And how do I change it? And do I stay in education, or if I leave, am I just one of the people that found out there was something wrong and left, and then we can never change it because all the people who found out something was wrong left? Like, and so I had this kind of crisis of conscience with the whole thing. And I still do sometimes. Like, I've been working in the public system up until the end of June this year, and I've always kind of struggled with that. So I'm very happy not to be working in the public school system anymore right now because of that struggle. Like if you're contributing member of that. Anyway, that being said, I think, yeah, that's about it. I also own a website called Demystifying Education, and I'm writing a book about the education system and how it really works, so that parents can kind of understand, parents and probably teachers can understand who makes decisions and why, and like right from the top down, how does it work and who plays what role. So things like that. And that's me.
Okay. So what we thought we'd do tonight, thank you, Golda, is we're going to do a little bit 10-minute presentation on what unschooling is, how it works in Alberta, and then just open it up to questions, because this is learner centered. That's what unschooling is. It's not our agenda, it's more your agenda. So I think Cynthia and Golda, all of us would agree, if we had to put the definition of unschooling in one sentence, maybe think about that, or maybe just think about what your definition of unschooling is. My definition of unschooling is that it's totally learner centered. The learner, which in our case is the child, makes the decisions on what they're going to learn, when they're going to learn it, how they're going to learn it, where they're going to learn it, and if they're going to learn it. And this is really big in adult education, which is what I started in as my work. I teach adults child development, and we are very learner centered in the adult world. We find out a needs assessment, we find out how people learn things, and if they don't want to learn it, we don't teach it. It's very simple. It's very much geared to what the learner wants, very collaborative learning. And yet I didn't find that in the school system when my kids went for the first year. So it's definitely something. So and then people say, well, how do you do unschooling? I don't think I'm doing it right. And it boils down to one word, I think, which is play. It's play. It's so simple. Empower your kids to play and they will learn. So that's kind of my definition. Cynthia, do you have a definition?
I actually just want to say that I agree with you. That was so massive. It was the thing that we centered it around, because my son was like, well, I don't want to do that because I'm not even learning anything. And so I'm like, okay, then we have to do stuff that is just completely of interest to him. And his idea of learning math was, he had not playing cards, but like a gaming card. And so when he was in grade 3 and grade 4, he was adding and subtracting in the multiple thousands in his head because he loved that game. If I would have sat him down and done worksheets, we would not have survived, neither him or I. But that game went on and on. He still plays that game, except it's switched to online because he's 15 now. But he still does it all in his head. And it's play. It is play every single time. We forget that that's what it really, really adds up to. And we forget that we don't learn when it is a drill and it's drilled into us. We learn when we can sit there and we can soak it up. And you make a little jingle on something and you remember it every time. I mean, how in the world do we remember even ads on TV? It's because they're playful and there's something, fun and colorful about them. And that's what kids will soak up.
Okay, great. Thank you. Golda.
I guess I mean I agree with your definition too, Judy. I aspire to be that. Actually, I still struggle sometimes because I'll read a book that will be very heavily biased towards the schooly type of thinking, and so I start thinking, oh, but what if I should be teaching him this, or I should be making this available, and so I think it's ideal. I do think that a lot of people are like me, though, that they struggle with that idea. And I constantly, so I have to kind of constantly, I'm a huge advocate of unschooling because I should have mentioned this. I'm a facilitator in Alberta too. And the reason I mentioned that is because I've seen kids go from hating learning to loving it within a year because their parents have embraced that way of thinking. So I've seen changes in children that are phenomenal and shocking, a shocking turnaround. And so not just in my own son who decided he wanted to learn to read. Oh yeah, that when I took him out, he was completely illiterate. That was another thing that really alarmed me. He was in the middle of grade 3. And I was alarmed because I know that the school system is not conducive to learning to read for kids like him. And so I could see where that was heading because I was a high school teacher before, and I saw kids arrive in grade 10 refusing to read. And so I wanted him, and so as soon as we kind of relaxed the whole, I said to myself at the time when I took him out of school, I'm not even going to mention reading. I'm going to read myself. I'm going to make books available, but I'm not going to read. I'm not going to make him read. And within 6 months, he had decided he wanted to learn to read and had taught himself. And so I saw that in my own child, giving them the space and freedom to decide what they wanted to learn. And I mean, who doesn't want to learn to read if they've realized what reading is for? That was his one thing. He needed to know what it was for, and he didn't really understand. It was like, oh, you learn things from reading. Well, now I need to learn. Thank you. That's great. So I think I guess that's kind of my definition now, even though I struggle, is that to give them space and time to decide that they want to learn something. Because I know as a human being, I could sit down in a classroom and learn if I'm forced to. I could, but it's not very deep learning. It's kind of shallow. And if I think about the times I really learned something deeply and quickly, it's because I wanted to learn it and I really decided to dedicate my own time to it 100%. And in fact, it's hard to stop someone from learning something when they're in that like mode. It's hard to stop yourself from learning. I remember trying to write an essay for school and learning about chickens, and I just couldn't stop because the chickens part, I mean, because I wanted to learn. So that's kind of what I think unschooling is giving a learner space and time to learn on their own when they want to and how they want to do it.
Okay, great. Awesome. Yeah, so there's a lot of definitions. But yeah, it does boil down to the child chooses. We empower the kids to choose. So in Alberta, it's very difficult to unschool on school programs because you're not in the driver's seat, and therefore you can't put your child in the driver's seat. So I kind of liken it to a car. When you're teacher directed or print-based resource or online or classroom, you can't unschool because that's the school is funded to provide education to meet the outcomes of the Alberta programs of study. The only place that it's easier to do is under home education. So under Code 600, parent-led home education. Now in Alberta, nothing in the regulations say that parents have to be the teachers. What you're signing up for is you're agreeing to provide your child with the education. You're responsible for them learning. And however way you do that is totally legal and up to you. So if you choose unschooling, the world knows it by unschooling, but it's also in the education world called self-directed education. So if you choose self-directed education for your child, that's a valid method of home education. And every school authority, if you're going the supervised route, is supposed to support that. If that's your philosophy, they're supposed to support it. In reality, doesn't always happen. There's a lot of hardcore teachers out there who are facilitators and do not agree that kids can't learn without a teacher. So so you definitely have to, when you sign up with the board, if you're going the supervised route, and yes, you can unschool and supervise home ed, you get funding for it. You do not have to follow the Alberta programs of study. All you have to do is meet the 22 outcomes for home education. And if you find your facilitator is not supportive, be sure to, you can change facilitators. It's good questions to ask now that if you're board shopping, those can be one of them. And we have that on our list of homeschool boards on Alberta Homeschooling. There's a column that we put in last year is, do you support unschooling? And it was really funny asking the boards these questions because they didn't even know, some didn't even know what I was talking about. So, but some really did. So so this is kind of how it works in Alberta. So by age 6, a child has to be registered somewhere, either with the government or with a supervising homeschool board or in a school provided program like classroom or online. But when you unschool, what we do is we keep on playing. The kids keep on playing. And in school, the kids are taken away from that play, and for 6 hours a day, sometimes more with homework, they're told, I'm sorry, you have to learn what we want you to learn. You can't learn what you want to learn through play. And that's a big, big difference. But what's interesting is if you follow kids' natural interest levels through their ages and stages of development, they will be curious and engaged in a lot of the topics that school kids are engaged in. It's quite amazing at the same ages too. Although some kids are different, you know, some kids might not be interested in playing with magnets till they're in the teen years. Some will be interested when they're 3. It all depends on the child. And then what a lot of unschoolers do is around age 15, 16, they may decide, you know what, I want to be a veterinarian. I love animals. And then they ask you, what do I do to be a veterinarian? And then you research together that, okay, you may need some high school science and some courses there. And then a lot of times unschooled kids think, okay, well, I can do this. I want to start taking high school credit courses. And yes, they absolutely can start in high school. If they're undertaking math, they may need to start more. I found grade 8 is the sweet spot for combining grades 1 to 8 in 1 year. They could learn everything from grades 1 to 8 in 1 year of grade 8 math, skip grade 9, and then go into grade 10 to 12 math and do just as fine as anyone else. And that's what they do, is then they sometimes navigate more to school, or they may just keep on going, enter the work world, go into entrepreneurship, start their own companies, become artists, whatever they want to do, the world's open to them. The beauty in Alberta is if they want to take high school courses, they still get funding from 18 to age 20. So that's 2 years they can pick up courses. If they don't want to do them on their own, they don't want to do them through parent-led or through teacher, they can still register for those courses in a school, classroom, online, get credit, get on their way kind of thing. So, so that's how it works in Alberta. It's totally legal. There was a slide I wanted to show you about brain development. Of course, I can never find the slide when I want it. Somewhere here. Anyways, So at this point, I think maybe, well, maybe I'll show you. Yeah, here we go. There's the brain development. Um, so here's a little basic of child development is that the brains generally develop from the bottom to the top and from the back to the front. So these are the occipital lobe, the cerebellum, the brainstem are very well developed in babies, the temporal lobe more in toddlers. And then when little preschoolers go to little preschool or playgroup, their parietal lobe is developing and quite sensitive. But it's this frontal lobe that has to reach a level of development for kids to start school. And why? Because they need to pay attention, they need to sit still, they need to concentrate, and they generally don't have that ability until about age 6. And that's why they don't start formal school until age 6, is having that self-control to do all those things. At age 13, that front part of the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, is what brings in that abstract thinking and that self-control of executive function, where they're ready to buckle down and do what they need to do without you nagging. Or they're more motivated, especially if that motivation comes internally, right? So, and you can see this development of self-control here, where, little kids at age 3 are not very good at school. My husband's English and they started nursery school at age 3, 4. And I think, oh, I hope they're not doing worksheets, because at that age, they just want to play. And they want to play, play, play. And then even here, kids learn mostly through experiential learning. So through play, through stimulating their 5 senses, through going on field trips, through engaging with other people and groups. 3-dimensional learning is where they learn best. And we discovered that in COVID, where 7, 8-year-olds are not designed to stay online in school every day for 3, 4 hours, not even 2 hours. And then at age 13, they start that final leap of self-control. And I notice anecdotally among my friends is about age 17 is when kids really start to look at their future. Their peers are looking at their future. They're really starting to figure out what they want to do and how to get it. And that's when they kind of slide into school about there, age 17. Or not, brain keeps going. Okay, so why don't we start taking questions? And how do you want to do this? Should we write in the chat box? Okay, where's my chat box? I'm on my husband's computer and the scroll bar I keep losing it. Okay. Anyone want to write a question in the chat box? And while we're waiting for questions, Cynthia, Golda, do you want to add anything? How unschooling works in Alberta?
No, I think that's pretty good. Just that I know some of the questions that parents ask sometimes, like they get really nervous about whether or not they're going to be missing something later on. And I always say things like, you don't stop learning at 18, you continue learning. And in fact, as your brain develops into an adult brain, it seems even easier to learn certain things.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, right?
Yeah. So we do have a question, and that's about registering with an Alberta school board and traveling within Canada or internationally. And I can answer that if you want, or do you want to do it, Judy?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. So you can register with an Alberta board and travel internationally or throughout Canada, but legally you have to be in Alberta September 30th in order to do that. So if you're traveling internationally, you must be in the province, your children must be in the province on September 30th in order to legally do that. Yes.
Okay, we have a question. Any advice for parents with 9 to 5 jobs and only have time with kids in the evenings and weekends? I would say That's a good question, because your kids, if you have kids under age 11, you'd probably have childcare lined up. And nannies can take them on field trips. Now, if they're going to a day home, maybe, they have things to do at the day home, depends how mobile the day home is. I really found that really hard while unschooling, because I was working during that time and my husband was out of town, and I didn't have childcare other than a babysitting co-op. So my kids would actually go to a babysitter's place, but all her kids were in school. So mine would be sitting there watching TV, which is kind of good because we didn't have TV at home. But it wasn't a whole lot of fun for them to not play with kids. So I think if you can find stimulating things for your kids to do during the day, if they're at home unschooling, and if they're older than age 12, then they'll find things to do. They often have projects or video games to play, things like that. Cynthia, Golda, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, that's pretty good. I work from home,
Yeah.
so I'm really lucky when it comes to that. My son is also older. He's 13 now. When he was younger, he needed more help, and he needed me as a resource. So it was a little harder. As he gets older, he gets more self-dependent. And I think if I was working outside the home, he could do it. I wouldn't want that for him, but he probably could do it. I prefer to be at work from home.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Can you expand a little on the options for math grade 11 to 10 to 12, grade 10 to 12? So a few of my friends, their kids have taken a math course called Math 15, and it's kind of it's a course to get kids up to speed in order to start grade 10 math. Kind of a bridging course. It's quite good, but I would recommend math grade 8 if your kids are new to math. And you know what? I shouldn't say they're new to math, because they're not new to math. They've been learning math for 13 years, but they have they've learned the concepts, they've learned it experientially. Now it's time to learn it on paper and learn how to actually add fractions on paper and things. And grade 8 is a good one for that. Grade 10 is a common math course. It's Math 10C, and then it kind of tells a child how well they do in grade 10 to whether they're going to go more to a math stream of -1 for grade 11 or -2 for grade 11. So, or -3. And it depends on what the child needs for their program. If they're working towards an Alberta diploma, they are going to need 10 credits of math to grade 10, grade 11 level. So it really depends. Math is one of those things. All the other courses in high school are standalone. Like I've had friends who their kids want to go into a university program, so they pick up Bio 30, they pick up English 30-1, they pick up Social 30 with no prerequisites whatsoever, and they do just fine because they have an adult brain. They learn things really fast. A lot of things they've already learned through their play. It's all good. But math does build. What do you think, Golden, Cynthia? Anything to add to that one?
Yeah, just it depends on the program they want to go into. So if they're going into a trades program, they should go into the -3 stream, because if you wanted to say be a registered apprentice, you have to have at least at the lowest level is 10-3 math. And -3, by the way, if you're not from Alberta originally, 10-1 is like the high level university prep, and the -3 is more like the college and trades math, and also life math. It's actually a really good course. So it depends on where they're kind of going. And yeah, so if for math for grades 10 to 12, you can it all depends on where they want to go with that. And like Judy said, you can skip to to a 30-1 diploma if you want, but it might be a little difficult
Yeah.
without the building up of knowledge beforehand.
Yes. And even in university, if they're going into humanities or arts, they can get away with -2. Yeah. -1 is more for the STEMs, science, engineering, mathematics. Okay. Yeah, Julia says, you said we can choose the boards. Absolutely. You can choose any willing board you want. We have the list on our website. It's constantly changing. Like some boards drop off the list and some we add in the year. So as they open up, so you pick the board, but it's a good question to ask when you're interviewing them is, do you support children, self-directed education, unschooling, and see what they say, because some boards don't.
Yeah, some boards say they do and then they don't, or you get a facilitator in the board that doesn't, or several things can happen. So like Judy said at the beginning, if you get a board or a facilitator that doesn't, you can, if you want to stay in that board, you can ask for a new one. And if that doesn't work, you can sometimes switch boards in the middle of the year, depending on how open they are, who's open and how many spots they have left.
Mhm. Okay, asking about transitioning into school around junior high. Well, I'll tell you, I had one child who wanted to go into school in junior high. And as unschoolers, if that's what they want to do, that's what we did. And it was good. She really liked it, but after about a week, it had no problems with academic requirements whatsoever. A good transition point was grade 7 or grade 10, just because a lot of kids are coming from different feeder schools and everybody's mixed up and it breaks up those cliques. But after a week, she decided it was just too much time and didn't like it and came back. So came back home to do her thing. So transitioning is it's no problem whatsoever with kids because socially they're mixed up and academically they'll just slide right in. Yeah. Anybody, Cynthia, Golda?
Yeah, our oldest came home, like I said, just right before Christmas in halfway through grade 7. And what was quite awesome, actually, even about that is he did have a friend from school and they continued to be friends. And eventually that friend did home education as well. So yeah, he kept his friends even from that circle. We ended up having the parents, rather than looking at us going, what the heck are you doing, they're like, can you tell me more about that? Because my son is struggling too, or my daughter is struggling. So I ended up with an inbox full of questions, because people were more curious than anything. And yeah, he transitioned beautifully. He loved it. He was like, oh, I don't have to sit there for 6 hours and feel like I'm locked in. So it was really good for us.
Okay. Great, thanks. Yeah, so Chelsea says, what did you mention what the 22 requirements are for learning in Alberta? So I didn't mention it, but it's on the Alberta homeschooling website. Is we call it the SOLO, so the schedule of learning outcomes for home education students that are not following the Alberta curriculum. So the 22 requirements are super, super vague. I'll see if I can go to the internet here, but it's on our website and you'll easily find it. It's just learning outcomes. Yeah. Question, can you talk about homeschooling special needs children and do you have some recommendations? Okay. Oh, that's a big one.
And then Cynthia's expertise, right?
I was going to say, do you want me to jump in on that?
Yes. Please.
Okay, so without knowing your situation, the lady who asked the question, I'm not exactly sure if there's diagnosis involved or, what the special needs is. But I will explain from our standpoint of what it was like for us. My son was diagnosed with high functioning autism, Fragile X syndrome, developmental delay, sensory processing disorder, anxiety disorder, and the list went on. Now, as big of a mouthful as that sounds, it's still, we kind of didn't look at the limitations. What we did was we brought him home and we just said, you know what, Elliot, we are going to live with you. We are going to just do life with you. And that is honestly, like, he's just going into grade 10 this fall. And that is what we've done up until this point. We did not stick on a whole lot of curriculum. That was just way too beyond where he's at. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't pick up grade 10 and that he would jump right in and, that he would be fine with it. We're really exploring that at this point. But that for us, and what my recommendation too is to go back to play. Like Judy said, I find that kept the calm. I find that kept the peace in our family. He did not spiral. He did not have the outbursts in the same way as long as the play was there. And also to explore in Alberta, I'm not sure your situation either, if you've reached out for family services for children with disabilities. There is some loopholes there. We've had challenges and really awesome moments with it. But it allowed us to have a support worker to come in. And we actually ended up hiring a gal who was going through her education program to be a teacher. And it challenged her to see how my son would learn without being in public school. She was blown away. She was originally from England, and she, everything was just orderly, and we do it in this fashion. And so when she saw that we wildly played, we followed Elliot with whatever he wanted to do, and sometimes that was a little bit challenging, because all of a sudden it was like, I want to do this in the middle of the day. And we're like, okay. And we did have some of the freedom for that, but it can be so beautiful. But going back to the life stuff, because we had trouble with hygiene. He didn't want to get in the shower. He just even eating healthy things, or getting out of the house. He did not want to get out of the house, refusal to even leave our home. So just living life with him made such a massive difference. And our facilitator was fantastic working alongside us. So those are key points to find, even if you can, a support worker to come and give a little bit of a reprieve for yourself, especially if you're home full time. But also the play is huge as well.
Thanks, Cynthia. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, my mute button keeps hiding on me. Okay. Any tips to convince my spouse, who I'm still trying to convince about home ed? We recently immigrated to Canada, and the public school system is better than where we are coming from. Homeschooling is an unknown topic to him. He would be amazed to hear my deepest desire is unschooling. So true. I had a spouse like that too. He came from England, and we interviewed the neighborhood school classrooms, and he thought it was fantastic. So it was a little hard, but tips, I think. Oh boy, I don't know. What do you guys think? Go to Cynthia. Any tips to? I just didn't tell my husband we were unschooling for 10 years, but not sure that's the best advice.
I've had that question lots actually. And so people write to me about this a lot because I am a facilitator too. And one of the things I recommend is to go and read those books that will give like pre-arm you with knowledge and the arguments for and against, because and some of the recommendations, of course, is Judy's book, Unschooling to University. That's the top suggestion. There's one called Unschooled by Carrie McDonald that's really good. And then if your children are young, even Peter Gray wrote a book called Free to Learn, and it's those books have a lot of information in them too. Not like Judy's book is focused on how you can get like the reasons for unschooling, but also how you can go further, how it's not going to hold them back in any manner or way, and how it works in Alberta. And then those other books that I mentioned, they really focus on the why. Like there's Blake Bull's book is fairly new. Why are you still sending your kids to school? Things like that. And it kind of pre-arms you with the arguments that you're going to need in order to demonstrate. And there is research out there that says that it's better. I think Carrie McDonald talks a lot about that in her podcast and in her whatever she puts out constantly. She's really good. So there's lots. Go pre-arm yourself with knowledge first before you talk to them. It's the best way. Like attending this seminar is one of those ways. You're learning information that you can go and use as arguments for unschooling.
Yeah, I put together, and I think it's in the Alberta homeschooling Facebook group, but I put together a list of the benefits that I assembled for a court case, and it's in the file section, but all the benefits. But I think Peter Gray, one of his studies was on, I think it was 72 kids, which was a small study, but hey, it was good. And he found that the earlier the kids had formal coercive education, meaning that they didn't get a choice in what they had to study, the least likely they would be to go on to post-secondary. And I think this is just anecdotal, but when kids aren't forced to learn somebody's agenda for 12 grades of their life, and they have a say in their learning, they're more apt to love learning and go on to learn when they do have to at some point, like during high school. If they want to be a veterinarian, they do have to get the math, the science, but they're more eager to get into it. So when a lot of kids are burning out by, you look at this slide here, by 13, a lot of kids are burning out because they've been in school a lot of times since 2. So from 2 until 13, they're done with somebody else telling them what they have to do and have to learn. And yet unschoolers come to school. They start their formal education in the teen years, and they come to it with gusto, and they're like, yes, this is fun. I like doing this. They're gearing up. And those are the years that count. If they're going on to post-secondary studies, those grade 12 marks they do count. They really do.
I have a story to that. Actually, I was a high school teacher, right? And in my last year of teaching in the classroom, about 5 years ago or so, there was this young woman who came into grade 10, and I didn't know this at the time, but she'd been unschooled up until then. And she's sitting in the front row, just like avidly watching me. And it was disconcerting because kids don't usually really listen very well in class. It was almost like, I was like, what is going on? Why is this child so focused on what I'm saying? Because it was such an oddity. And I found that about a lot of homeschool kids. Like when I was with one of the school divisions I worked with, and as a homeschool facilitator, we had done this learning thing where they were learning about Aboriginal history and learning how to do something. Like I think we made a dream catcher or something. And the teacher at the front of the classroom is also a teacher in schools. Like she's an Aboriginal culture teacher. And she found it very difficult actually to teach to a group of homeschoolers because they were all listening to her the whole time. And so it was going too fast. Like there was no interruptions. Like, what do you do with all of this time when everyone's actually paying attention the whole time and you don't have to manage their behavior? And I remember in the break, I went up to her, I said, "It's weird, isn't it?" She said, "Yeah, it is." She knew exactly what I was talking about. I was like, they're all listening the whole time. The entire hour that you've been speaking, they're completely engaged in what you're saying. And it's weird because that's not how it works in school. So that is one of the arguments, is that when kids who are homeschooled are learning, they're completely engaged and interested, or they wouldn't be there. That's the whole point.
My son asked for about $200 worth of undergraduate physics lectures for Christmas. So the funny things that you will buy as a home educating parent. And, he has said to me, he's, gone through those books. He studies them, late into the evening. And so we've chatted about that. And he's like, "So what did you learn in physics, Mom, in high school?" And I'm like, actually, I don't know. I can't answer that because I can't remember. And he says, "Well, was it along the lines of such and such?" And I said, "Yeah, probably." And he's like, "Well, no wonder you didn't like it. That is like the most boring part of physics you could ever learn. Why do they teach it so generically?" And he's just on fire. I mean, he's just my physics lover. But I mean, those are the things that are going to just wildly surprise you of what they run with and what they study when you're not looking.
I would just quickly add to that too. There's not a whole lot of research out there in the education world, just because they don't really want to know this is a thing. But Summerhill School in England has been operating for 100 years. It's a self-directed school since 1921, and the government has tried to shut them down so many times based on they're not educating the kids, and yet they can't, because the evidence is those kids come out of there with lots of learning, even though it's self-directed. Another concept is free schools in the North America, in the USA. If you Google free schools, or Sudbury schools, you'll see there's a lot of schools who unschool, but in a classroom, so it's funded, and research is very, very good there. So if your partner's looking for more evidence base, that's that you could look at those things.
And there are people researching it too. I think there's a research study going on in being funded by Scotiabank, actually. It's going on in Toronto right now. Hopefully those results will be out in the next couple of years, because the woman who's running that, or part of that study, is running that Unschooling School website. And then there's studies being done by people like Carrie McDonald and Peter Gray. So there's some research behind what we believe too, not just anecdotal evidence. There are people who are researching that right now and have researched it, and it's been very positive so far.
Nice. Great. Thanks. Okay. Question: is the facilitator a teacher, and what is her role? Yes, they have to have a teaching certificate in Alberta. And Golda, you want to answer this? What's your role as a facilitator?
So I know it depends on which board you pick, because I've heard some stories. Technically, the facilitator role is to make sure that you have a home education plan written, and if you don't, they can help you do that if you're not sure how. And then, so there's 2 visits a year. The first visit is when that home education plan's being set up. It's usually done in the fall. In about a month, they'll start those visits. And by home visit, quite often they can be done over the phone or by Zoom if you're concerned about diseases spreading through the province or whatever right now. And then at the end of the year, you have another visit, and the home education facilitator writes a final report based on what you show or tell them your child has done. It's not a very difficult process, and it's nothing to be concerned about, because most home education facilitators are supportive of home education. In fact, in the regulation, it says that they're supposed to be, for school division to pick them, they're supposed to be supportive of home education. But there are some stories I've heard about how it doesn't work quite like that for some people. Just pick a different school next year, because there are lots of facilitators out there who are supportive and who will not make that process difficult for you, and who are just there to make sure that you get your funding and to make sure that you have the support that you need. Another thing the facilitator is supposed to do is, if you wanted to take the PAT exams, like the provincial exams, they are supposed to help you accomplish that if you want to. Not nobody should ever be pushing those on you, but if you wanted your child to take them, they are to set up the possibility for that to happen.
And can I jump in there just to talk about our facilitator meetings? I'm just going to assume, just kind of feel like somebody out there needs to hear this. With home educating a child with specific or special needs, we struggled enormously with our facilitator meetings, because when high anxiety hits or something that is unexpected, even prepared for, it feels unexpected to my son for years. So from the middle of grade 4 until about 1 year ago, we have had 2 visits with the facilitator where he is actually verbal, because in that anxiety, he will go selectively mute. She has so beautifully accommodated us. So this is where, if you do have specific needs for your child, find an amazing facilitator, fight for it, because he now can actually talk with her. So what we did, an example, was to write out the things together, him and then I would speak for him. He would be on video. Sometimes that was even difficult for him. He would pass by just so that she could see that he was actually alive and existed. So they will work with you to have a more comfortable experience. So I just wanted to jump in there for anybody who is afraid of the visit. You have an amazing facilitator. You don't have to be afraid.
Good. Awesome. Next question is, my kids are still young, 4 and 6. They're getting more and more independent. What scares me is I'm not a fan of board games or even playing with them, even if I spend a lot of time with them. Do you have any tips to introduce games, or how do you define see play at any age? Um, I would say play is play. Like 0 to age 12, kids play a lot with toys. um, Lego, dolls, pretend, dress up, um, video games, board games, craft materials, science kits. They love play. I personally, and see this a lot in child development, is about age 12, you see more play, but it's digital. They do it more online. Um, they write blogs, they argue with someone on Reddit, which is kind of play, but they look up things, they play video games. Um, but board games, I think if you're not a fan of board games, you don't have to play with them. There are a lot of board games that you can invite kids over and play with your kids, and kids can play them themselves. Maybe your young one a bit in a few more years, but have some play dates where they can play other things. Again, it doesn't have to be board games. That's just one way to learn. I want to show you this video because these are brain cells, neurons, and no matter what a child does, whether they're studying a math book or playing a video game, this is learning. This is what chemically happens in the brain. A neurotransmitter comes down this neuron's axon down here to the neighboring brain cells, and it comes down this axon terminal here, and it crosses over that little gap there on the dendrite of this cell. And let's do it. That's learning. And the brain doesn't care if it's from a video game or from a math book. It just does it. See that brain cell making connections. This happens in babies. It even happens on us watching this video right now. So play can be any play. Whatever your child chooses, it's play. Cynthia Golda, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I don't like playing I don't like playing board games either, actually. So I hear you on that one. I just like it because I get too competitive and then I don't like myself anymore. That's honestly why I don't like board games. So I didn't want to transmit that onto my child. I also come from a generation where my parents never played with us. They had a lot of children actually, but so they just assumed that we would play with each other, but they weren't really. So I don't really have any modeling for that either. So I feel like I've never been very good at that, even when my kids were really young. So I don't do that, but and someone, and she also asked, how do you define play? And I think even doing a worksheet can be play if you're enjoying it. Like some people like learning like that. So there's nothing wrong. Anything when you're completely in the zone or when you're completely engaged in your learning, that feels like play. And that's why we like it. It's because it's interesting and we're engaged.
Yeah. It's just facilitating it, just making the space for it to happen. Sometimes for me, it's like, I just wanted to step away, or I needed to step away. Yeah, and agree with Golda too. We didn't get played with a whole lot either as a child. So let their imaginations roll. My son, his friend would come over and I didn't play with them. They went into the recycle bin and built things. So they just grabbed whatever they could find and they built something. And guess what happened 5 years later? They started to gather computer parts and they built their own computer. Did I build it with them? I have no idea how to do that. But at that point, they were ready. I provided the credit card and used some of the funding for the special project, and they were in charge of building that. So totally, yep, with you on that score.
Yeah, and get them to clean up the mess after. Okay, that's fun. So Jill says, is home directed based unfunded? We're getting that question a lot now. Now that we have two types of home education. You can go funded or unfunded. It's up to you. So you can unschool on unsupervised, you can unschool on supervised. So it's up to you too. You just choose what you want to do.
And unsupervised, you just register directly with the government and you don't hear from anybody again. You don't get any funding, but you also don't have to have those 2 visits from a facilitator. The facilitator route that we've been talking about is how you get funding. And it's the same amount as all other homeschoolers, $850 a child.
Yeah. Okay, Allison, question. Whether the public schools are required to accept a homeschool child, can they refuse a child? No, your neighborhood designated public school cannot refuse to take your child. Now, if they don't have space, they can offer an alternative school, and you don't have a choice in that. You have to take that choice, but they cannot say, nope, your child cannot come to school at whatsoever, right? Go to Cynthia. I'm sure, I know, I read that Education Act over and over.
We were home educating, like I said, in New Brunswick. And then when we moved here, the boys went into public school. They were amazing. They did not refuse us. And I was so worried because, we had missed September to November. My kids weren't getting enrolled until end of November. And I was like, are they going to be behind? Are they going to be this? Are they going to be that? And the teachers were just like, no, we put them in age appropriate with their peers, Cynthia, they're going to be just fine. So not all experiences are like that, but we did have really good experiences with them. They didn't turn their noses up at all. They were wonderfully welcoming.
Yeah. And yeah, they just slot you in whatever grade corresponds to the age. So if you have a child who's my one child that wanted to go to school, she was 8, she went into grade 3. That's what they do. Just slot you in there. Okay, good answer, Golda, there. Can you say the Blake book again? Do you know the Blake Bowles book what it's called?
Yeah, it's why are you still sending your kids to school? I wrote it in the chat too. And I also
Okay.
wrote the other authors that I mentioned. There's lots of books out there, but those are the ones that I talk about the most because those
Okay.
are the ones I liked or connected with, I guess.
And if you want to get the Unschooling to University book, I can mail it out to you. Canada Post charges, depends on where you live, but about $18 to mail that book because it doesn't fit in the tiny little slot. It's too big. So if you want to e-transfer me the $20 to mail it, I will pop it in the mail for you. Just send it to my email address at jarnall@shaw.ca, all A's. Okay, just one more thing, socializing. Are there groups we could join so we can set up field trips? I would say, Allison, best way to do that is connect with the Facebook groups in your area. So I know a lot of people aren't on Facebook, but you kind of need, homeschoolers are very well connected through social media. So Facebook seems to be it. I don't think TikTok is that big yet for for organizing that. So if you like Google Grand Prairie homeschooling, then you will get more local areas, and then you can get on there and say, hey, is anybody setting up field trips to such and such? Or best way to do that is to set up a field trip by you. It's easy. You just phone up the venue, organize a day and time that works for you, and then go on social media and say, hey, I booked this on this date and time. Anybody want to come? Here's the cost. E-transfer me the money. Show up at this date. And it's really easy to set those up. Cynthia Golda, you want to answer anything more there? No? Okay. Myrna, can we ask a question not on chat but unmuted? Yes, go for it. Myrna. There she is.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. I think that you answered a few questions I had here. Like I've been a homeschool. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Okay. Since COVID. So I've been homeschooling my son. So that would be from grade 6, and he's going into grade 7. And my granddaughter, she is in grade 2, but she's going to school. She has to go to school because we're foster parents for her.
Mhm.
And so like the funding, I never used it. So I probably would like to do the unfunding and have nobody in, because I have enough people coming to my house and doing foster care with them, I think the unsupervised unfunding, is that what it is?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Oh,
That's the
okay.
one you just fire
That's the
off
one I would want.
to the government, and they don't contact you at all. Yeah.
Oh, okay. My next question was answered pretty much with socializing. My son, he's really missing it, and I think he's getting depressed or stressed out. He's going to be 12 in a few days, and it just hurts my heart that he doesn't have the friends he had. And he's very sociable, and so I really want him to be in groups of his age group, and I just didn't know how to do that. So how does he make friends? How do you get the playmates, was one of the things. So yeah,
Okay.
those were 2 of my questions, but I'm glad that you talked about the unfunding and like for them to stay out of, my business. You know, my children have a lot of fun. They learn all the time, so they're learning constantly.
Yeah.
I also have my son in a schooling. It's on school. We pay for it every month. It's like I forget the name of it, IO or something like that. And he does a lot of work on there, but he gets bored with it. But he's also going out and doing stuff around the house, like building things, and he wants to go over, you know, to Spark and all of these places here in Calgary.
Hmm.
And so I asked him like earlier on in the year if he wanted to stay at home homeschooling, and he said yes. But because he's missing friends, he's starting to say he wants to go to school, and I do not want him in school. I want him unschooled.
Okay. So some of the ways to get kids socialized is to well, not socialize, but to meet people is you know, if you have space in your house, you could have like kids over to video game, you know, bring their laptops, bring their phones, they get to video game. That seems to be, I've had a lot of success with that with my boys, is that once a week they come over and the parents would love it because they could drop them off and bring snack, take turns. If your home is not an option, you could arrange it at a library. Libraries are public places, your taxes pay for them. You can just grab a table and, you know, board game, or, you know, the kids do need an activity to focus on. We found volunteering really helped at age 12. They can volunteer at a few places, sometimes with a parent, sometimes not. So, and then just outside clubs like Boy Scouts or church groups or things like that. The kids have to kind of agree to go, but school is not the only way to find friends. And research shows that all kids really need is one good friend. They don't need a classroom. They don't need hordes of cliques to grow up developmentally healthy. Just one friend is usually it, right? So yeah. Cynthia and Golda, do you want to
Mhm.
add anything to that?
Mhm.
I do. Did you want to, Cynthia?
You can go first, Gold. I'll go after you.
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to say that a lot of parents, even long-term homeschoolers, are feeling that right now, that isolation because of COVID. And so that's actually been a big problem, and it's not something you could have done anything about. It's not your fault that he's isolated right now. It's because of COVID that that's happened, and it's happened to all of us in that age group. My son is 13, and he also is talking about going back to school, which I think of Blake Bull's book, Why Are You Sending Your Kids to School? I'm like, no, you can't. Anyway, I'm just joking. I think the only reason he wants to go is for socialization too. So what we plan to do this year is I'm gonna get on those Facebook groups and go, hey, let's do a homeschool picnic here, and then have everyone show up with their food and just meet other kids. It might not be in the same age group, but that doesn't really matter. I mean, we don't associate with, I'm 49. I don't just associate with 49-year-olds. I think it's good for them to get socialized with different age groups. And the second thing I wanted to mention, Myrna, is that you can still get your funding from last year wherever you were registered. So I think the program you were talking about was IXL, and you can submit the receipts for that, and they have to give that funding to you if you were registered last year somewhere. So I just wanted to tell you, you have an entire year left to get funding from last year wherever you were registered last year, and they should be making that a little simpler for you, but that's just my opinion.
Okay, so what would be, I don't even know what the funding would be, because everything we do is pretty much free except for that course that he's taken. So I don't even know what I would use the 850 for. Like
Your internet.
Had time. We had time to duke that out. I had time to sit with him in those eruptive states rather than having to fight to get to school, because the fight to get to school was we only had one vehicle. We were running on one income. So money is tight. We've got a 10-minute walk to school. And sometimes in those hard days, we did that 3 times: to school, home, to school, home. And we would collapse. But we had time to collapse. That was the thing. That was the beauty of it, is once we completely said, we're not doing school, we are going to focus on this. And Judy is so right. There's so much more that happens in relationship. There is such a richness that comes out. You actually start looking at your kids and you're like, man, I want to know what you think about this. And I want to know what you think about that. And all of a sudden the switch changes to where they're like, oh, my mom values me. And you have time for that. Those are the things that you don't have time for. I found in public education was because they're exhausted. They don't want to hear anything more. They have no more room in their head. They have no more room inside of them. There is just like, get away from me. I don't want to be touched. I don't want you to listen to me. But I had that. I had them right there. And so we could fight through those things. And now our days are not eruptive meltdowns. Now it's like, hey, Ellie, you want to cook with me today? Hey, Arliss, do you want to go to the library and pick up 10,000 books on physics and chemistry and psychology and everything else? Do you want to play chess? Do you want to go, for a hike and look at the stars? And so our days are different because they're older, so they can take some of that. But yeah, Judy talks about play. We played and played and played and played. It has to include coffee. So 1,000%. I mean, I journaled. I got to learn, and I got to take courses, and they got to see me, learning right alongside them. And yeah, there's just such a beauty in that. So a little bit all over the place, but that sometimes is what a home education day looks like. You might be completely organized and it just kind of ticks like this. I mean, Judy had a big schedule. I didn't have a schedule. My son didn't allow me to have a schedule. There was absolute refusal to go anywhere. So we spent a lot of time at home, and so I learned about him and he learned about me, and it's beautiful. Yeah.
Nice, thank you. Just for the recording, I forgot to turn it back on. We're talking about what our typical days look like unschooling. So now we'll go to Goda.
So my son is what I like to call freedom oriented. So he doesn't like too much direction, and I'm not very scheduled. I also work from home, and I work a lot of hours. In some parts of the year, I work a lot of hours, like 12 to 18-hour days. So those days are when my son is completely left on his own for the most part to do what he wants. And what he usually wants, I thought, was just playing games, video games, but actually we just took a trip across down through northern Alberta and then through northern BC and down to the Fraser Valley in British Columbia. And I found out on that trip, because there was a lot of those lots of hours of no cell service and no radio. I found out that he's been researching mega corporations and how they began and what the problems were with them. He's always surprising me with what he's done with his time. I guess there was an instance too just a while ago where I bought this. I every once in a while get my school mind back on, and I can't get rid of it. So I buy a program and we have to do something, and you have to learn. Anyway, it was called the Great World Adventure. It's like one of the offshoots of the Great Canadian Adventure. So it's a book, and it was about the history of the universe from the Big Bang to, we're not at the end of the book yet, but it's around the time when Earth was, starting to be made. And we're in the first part of the book. And in the book, there's these little QR codes that go to YouTube channels And so I scanned it. I scanned one of them, and it was, I thought, quite a boring. I like physics, by the way. It was my second teachable when I was a teacher in Ontario. So I like physics, but this was quite a boring physics professor, I thought, talking about the Big Bang Theory, droning on, and the video is 10 minutes long. And about 2 minutes in, I started thinking, oh, he's gonna lose interest. And he said, Mom, I already watched this. I follow this guy on YouTube. I'm like, what? You follow this physics professor on YouTube? He goes, yeah, he's always talking about the Big Bang Theory. And I like the Big Bang Theory. I think it's really interesting. And so I did nothing to help that happen. I would like to believe that I did, but I didn't. So his day is often very, very self-directed. And he is doing amazing things. And sometimes I don't find out until much later, like him knowing the entire history of McDonald's, for example, was a shock to me. I did not realize that he had been researching that because he was interested in how these corporations became so big. And so I think there's so he moves through his day. Sometimes we do one of those homeschool events where I set up like an activity for all the other homeschoolers, or I've set up things like swimming days and things like that. And just to have some socialization and connect, and not just for him, but for me too, because if you kind of sit in your office like I do, and I was working in the public system before this, you kind of just, like I said, get these ideas about what you're doing wrong. And so I kind of feel like I need to connect with other people often myself as well. And so my day, the days are different, but I'm more like, I'm more introverted naturally. So it's easier for me to stay home than to do what Judy did. Also, I don't live in a city. And so it's an hour away to the nearest little town that even has a library. And so it's not as easy to get resources and go to clubs and stuff like that. So that's what our days look like in our house.
That's cool. That made me think of one of my 13-year-old sons. He was so interested in Germany and Second World War and Hitler, and he was getting books out of the library and reading about all this stuff. And some of the pictures were it's heavy material. And I think that's the beauty of unschooling too, is they can find their passions, because he always loved Germany. When he went to university, he got a work term over in Germany for 4 months to work for a German company. And he taught himself German to do that. And now he's actually living in Germany. So you see interests come earlier because kids have a lot of time to explore a lot of things. Their exposure is just amazing. Even if they sit on YouTube all day, they do find out different things. So I kind of said what my value of, just to wrap up, my value of unschooling was time for family, time for interests. Golda or Cynthia, let's go to you. What's your biggest benefit of unschooling?
Oh, the calm that came from just the distractions and the anxiety that was, it's just that thumb. It was so much pressure. And so we were able to, that was just so released. And as soon as we just took hold of our time and what we wanted instead of what a system or other people were demanding of us, and to meet that, we said, you know what, we're not going to meet that. As for me and my house, this is what we are doing. And that was so empowering. And my kids were just like, I mean, they never said it, but it was like, thank you, Mom, for hearing us. Thank you, Mom, for hearing what we couldn't say. And everybody's experience is different. But that was hugely for us.
Okay, thank you. And Golda.
Yeah, I'd say my values, our family values are freedom and time. What we value about unschooling is the freedom to learn, right? the freedom to learn what he wants, and the freedom for me to do it, and then the time to do it in, because there is, as Cynthia's right about the amount of exhaustion kids experience when they come home from school. They're just tired. I see them actually behaving like, we live in a really small town of about 400 people. I see the kids arriving from school, and one of them was hanging out with my son, and he was doing very destructive things. And my son said, "Why is he behaving that way?" I said, "I think that kids your age sit in classrooms all day and they're angry, that in a really fundamental sense, down deep, they're angry that they're being imprisoned. So that's coming out in undesirable behavior later when there's like a freedom to do." So I think people who are unschooled with the freedom that they have, and the space and time that they need to explore their own interests, don't have that type of anger inside where they're being incarcerated basically for 6 or 7 hours a day. And there's an anger that goes with that, I think. And I said, and also he's sitting there bored all day. He's bored all day, and then he's now, he's just got this really negative energy. So that's why that happens to kids that are going to school. I'm not saying that all kids that are unschooled are perfectly behaved, because they're not, but I do think that what our experiences are throughout our day lead to our behavior and our feelings. So I think that's a big, so freedom and time, but also the ability to self-direct is really leads to a more positive attitude about life in general.
Okay, great, awesome. So thank you everyone for coming. If our contact is in the chat session, if you want to contact any of us three and ask us more questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you for coming. I just want to end with my favorite poem here. It's by Anonymous. I don't know who wrote it, but it goes like this. I tried to teach my child with words. They often passed him by unheard. I tried to teach my child with books. He only gave me puzzled looks. Despairingly, I turned aside. How can I teach this child? I cried. Into my hand, he placed the key. Come, he said, and play with me. So it's how kids learn, play. So thank you, Cynthia and Golda, for coming tonight, and everybody else. And we'll probably do this again, maybe in the fall sometime. And we hope this was helpful for you. Give you a little more thought about unschooling. So yeah.
Thank you too, Judy. Thanks for hosting this tonight, and thanks for putting it together.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for all your questions. We wouldn't be here without those questions.
Yes, thanks everyone for coming. That was awesome.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Bye, everybody. Have a good evening.
Good night, everyone.
Oh, I did that at meeting.